The Soviet war in Afghanistan is a conflict that's never really been explored by Hollywood, and I guess it's not exactly hard to see why. It was a long, costly, and ultimately pointless war that America had no real part in, and which didn't have a particularly happy ending for either side. I mean, yeah, we got Rambo 3, but let's be honest here, it wasn't exactly a realistic portrayal of the Soviet Union's last big military conflicts. But what if I told you there actually was a movie made back in the 80s that did its best to give a balanced portrayal of the conflict from both Soviet and Afghan perspectives? A movie that portrayed the soldiers fighting on the ground as neither good nor bad, but simply people forced to fight a war they had no interest in or understanding of. A movie called The Beast. Or The Beast of War, depending on what part of the world you come from. Either way, The Beast is a fucking awesome war movie that for some reason nobody seems to know about today. And it's a real shame because they're missing out on a genuinely excellent story with complex characters, great acting and dialogue, well-structured action scenes, and a surprisingly thoughtful and nuanced take on a very complex situation. But what the hell, movies like this are exactly why I do the Extra Shot series, so let's dive right in. The movie begins in 1981. The Soviet armies invaded Afghanistan and taken over the country, but groups of Mujahideen rebels operating out of the mountains and remote villages are making life increasingly difficult for them. One village in particular that's suspected of harbouring enemy rebels comes under attack by a Soviet tank unit, and needless to say, Soviet heavy armour and jets versus unarmed villagers goes about as well as you might expect. Unfortunately, one of the tanks ends up getting separated from the rest of the unit when it takes a wrong turn down a dead-end valley, and the Mujahideen fighters who were away from the village during the attack set out to get revenge on it. So the movie kind of alternates between the increasingly desperate crew of the tank as they try to reunite with their own forces, and the small band of Afghan fighters out to stop them at any cost. As resources run low and the tank develops mechanical problems, tempers and suspicions flare amongst the crew, and their ruthless commander becomes increasingly brutal and paranoid. At one point, he straight up executes an Afghan soldier serving under him, and when another crewman named Constantine threatens to report him for murder, he bullies the others into leaving him behind for the Mujahideen to kill. Fucking nice one. Only they don't kill him. Calling on the ancient Afghan tradition of giving aid to your enemies if they ask for it, he finds reluctant sanctuary amongst the Mujahideen, and soon discovers that instead of the brutal savages he'd been told they were, they turn out to be decent, honourable people who treat him with more respect than the supposed comrades who abandoned him. And wouldn't you know it, before too long he agrees to help them destroy the Beast. What continually surprises me about The Beast is how it manages to be a smart and thoughtful story rather than just a generic war film. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of action and explosions to keep things moving along, and a couple of truly grim death scenes. The cinematography's excellent, the set pieces are fantastically well put together and look pretty fucking realistic, especially for a film made on a pretty slim budget. But beneath all this flashy stuff, there's a surprisingly smart, balanced and thoughtful story that provides an interesting insight into a war that's never been well understood over here. The Soviet tank crew are a real mixture of different personalities. Some of them are reluctant conscripts who just want to get home alive, others are cold and cynical about the war, and it's interesting to watch the shift in dynamics amongst them as the pressure ramps up. Constantine himself is a bit more of an intellectual, an educated man who's curious about Afghan people and their culture, and treats Samad, their Afghan crewmate, with respect. Unfortunately, this puts him on a collision course with Daskal, the brutal tank commander who fought as a teenager in World War II, and who seems to care more about the big chunk of metal around them than the men under his commands. At one point, they even have a chance to get picked up by a Soviet chopper, but Daskal insists on continuing with their mission, even threatening to shoot his own men if they try to leave. The Afghans, on the other hand, are torn between wanting to kill Constantine, tradition be damned, or using his knowledge of Soviet weapons to their advantage, or showing him the respect and dignity that custom demands. They take their own losses throughout the movie, and by the time the final battle rolls around, they've been reduced to a handful of exhausted fighters, out of resources and out of ideas. It's a real David and Goliath confrontation, with the lightly armed but very resourceful Afghans taking on the might of the Soviet tank, slowly wearing it down and stripping away its defences. Strength and power versus wits and determination, and perhaps a little bit of help from an unlikely source. What I really love is how the movie manages to shift the emotional tone and balance so effectively once Constantine switches sides. At first, the world outside the tank is depicted as a harsh, sun-bleached desert, a hostile environment full of enemies, with hidden dangers behind every rock and cliff. but as the movie progresses and Constantine learns to use the environment to his advantage, the tank itself becomes the real object of dread. A big, lumbering, smoking, fire-scorched mountain of steel grinding relentlessly forwards. Ultimately, the ending's kind of ambiguous in terms of what it wants to say about the war. It doesn't really portray either side as heroic or vindicated by what's happened. I mean, Constantine certainly doesn't look like a triumphant hero that just defeated an evil enemy. He's very much a broken man, exhausted and disenchanted by what he's been through, and probably done with fighting for good. And he leaves behind him a ragged band of survivors facing a long war and an uncertain future. Overall though, The Beast is a movie that didn't get anywhere near the recognition and praise it deserved at the time, but it's gradually gained more respect over the years. And honestly, if you're looking for a solid and thought-provoking war movie told from a perspective you don't often see, then I absolutely guarantee you'll enjoy this film. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.